My parents spent $50,000 in my sister's wedding but never invited me. My mother smirked. You're single. It would have been embarrassing. The next day, my sister showed me a photo. Best day ever. You'll never have one, she said. I silently placed a photo on the table. Her smile froze as the evening twilight embraced the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City during its gala weekend. Emily Carter gazed around the venue with a satisfied sigh. Her curated exhibition, a dialogue between ancient and modern, had finally opened, and prominent figures from the art world were approaching her one after another with words of congratulation. Emily had steadily built her career as a museum curator over the past decade. Dressed in a black silk gown, her composed demeanor commanded respect from those around her. Her colleague Laura approached her with a champagne glass in hand. Emily, this is a marvelous success. This exhibition will be the highlight of the year, she said with a smile. Thank you, Emily smiled back. This project has finally come to fruition after 3 years of planning. Laura hesitated slightly before asking, by the way, when is your sister's wedding? Emily's expression clouded momentarily. Next month? She answered briefly before quickly changing the subject. She was lying. The truth was, she didn't know the details herself. The relationship between the Carter sisters, Emily and Sarah, was complicated. Sarah was a successful real estate agent specializing in prime Manhattan properties. With her flashy personality and sociable nature, Sarah always loved being the center of attention. Meanwhile, Emily was introverted, valuing deep conversations and art over showiness. Their parents, Helen and George, were enjoying a comfortable retirement in an elegant neighborhood in Connecticut. George had found success in investment banking, while Helen was prominent in society circles, deeply involved in local charity work. Anyone looking at their family photos would see the image of a perfect family. However, beneath those smiles worked an invisible dynamic. From childhood, the parents had treated Sarah as special. Her vivacity, sociability, and occasional vulnerability triggered their protective instincts. Meanwhile, Emily was labeled the irresponsible one, the independent child, and rarely received the same expressions of affection. Emily is smart. She'll be fine, Helen would often say, but Sarah needs our help. Those words never changed, not when Emily was honored as high school valedictorian, not when her graduate research received international recognition, not when she was first promoted to curator. Her success was expected. Sarah's smallest progress was to be celebrated extravagantly. Emily also didn't have much expected of her romantic life. She had focused on studies during her school years and prioritized her career during her formative professional period. She had dated several men before her early 30s, but never met anyone who truly understood her inner self. While her parents pretended to worry about her single status, they seemed to have resigned themselves to the idea that marriage wasn't for Emily. On the other hand, Sarah's romantic history was always the family's focus. With each breakup, her parents spared no comforting words or financial assistance. Then, 7 months ago, Sarah had announced her engagement with much fanfare. Her fiancé was Ryan Blake, an investment banker described as sociable, charming, and from a wonderful family. When Emily first met Ryan at the engagement party, she felt an odd sense of discomfort. His smile, his way of speaking, and especially the way he looked at her gave her the impression of calculation. He seems familiar somehow, Emily thought, but couldn't connect the sensation to a specific memory. If my sister is happy, that's all that matters, she told herself, suppressing her uneasiness about Ryan. However, that slight discomfort would eventually lead to a discovery that would fundamentally overturn her life and family relationships. As the gala drew to a close, Emily checked her smartphone. There were no messages from her parents or Sarah. No words congratulating her exhibition's success, just silence. This wasn't unusual for Emily, but tonight was supposed to be special. She finished her remaining champagne and prepared to return to her everyday routine. One Thursday evening, a week after the exhibition's successful opening, Emily finally settled comfortably on her sofa with a glass of red wine beside her. She casually opened Instagram, which she hadn't checked for a long time, and began scrolling. Suddenly, her finger stopped. A photo posted by her friend Sophia with the hashtag Carter Blake wedding filled the screen. A church adorned with white flowers, a champagne tower, and Sarah and Ryan standing in the center. Sarah was wrapped in a pristine white designer dress, radiating happiness. Emily checked the date in confusion. The photo had been posted last Saturday, the very day she had been busy with the museum's gala event. She quickly began checking other photos, the venue decorations, the lavish cake, people gathering on the dance floor. Her parents' smiling faces were there too, Helen in a designer dress, George standing proudly in a new tuxedo. Then reality hit her hard. Her sister's wedding had taken place, and she hadn't been invited. This must be some mistake, Emily told herself. Perhaps she had lost the invitation, or maybe they didn't know her new address. But she had been living in the same apartment for 3 years. Her parents and sister knew her address perfectly well. With trembling hands, Emily dialed her mother's number. The call continued, but there was no answer. Her father's number yielded the same result. Finally, she tried Sarah's number, but it immediately went to voicemail. Emily put down her smartphone and stared again at the Instagram photos. Everyone in the pictures looked like they were having a wonderful time. They showed no sign of missing her presence. Throughout the weekend, Emily repeatedly sent messages and made calls, but there was no response from her family. On Monday, she tried to focus on work, but her heartache only grew. By Wednesday afternoon, Emily had made a decision. She would visit her parents' home in Connecticut. She requested Friday off from her boss and set out by car on Thursday evening. She arrived at her parents' house just after 7:00 p.m. The familiar white 3-story house looked unchanged from the outside. However, the moment she entered, Emily felt that something significant had changed. A large wedding photo hung in the entryway. Sarah and Ryan holding hands before the altar, and in the corner of the photo stood her parents, looking proud without her. Helen came out of the living room in surprise. "What brings you here?" "You should have called ahead." Emily took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "It seems Sarah's wedding took place. Why wasn't I informed?" Helen was momentarily speechless, then shrugged. "Oh, that was just a change of plans. We had to move it up suddenly because of Ryan's schedule. We wanted to let you know, but weren't you busy as usual?" "That's a lie," Emily said, controlling her trembling hands. "You knew about my exhibition long in advance, but I wasn't even invited." "Why?" At this moment, George appeared from the living room, his face showing confusion. "Emily, what brings you here so suddenly?" "Dad, why wasn't I invited to Sarah's wedding?" Emily repeated her question, looking alternately at both parents. A heavy silence filled the room. Helen and George exchanged glances, communicating something to each other. Finally, Helen sighed. "I'll be honest. As a single woman, it didn't concern you, did it? We didn't invite you because it would have been embarrassing." Those words were like a knife in Emily's chest. "Embarrassing? What would have been embarrassing?" "It was Sarah's special day," Helen said, not hiding her irritation. "Ryan's family and friends were all wonderful people, all successful. Everyone was expected to come as couples. Having you sitting there alone, single and career-focused, would have made everyone uncomfortable." Emily was speechless. Was her career, her independence, and her very existence an embarrassment to her family? "Look, there's no need to worry about it," Helen continued. "It was the most important day of Sarah's life. Everything had to be perfect. Are you saying I'm an imperfect element?" Emily's voice was trembling. "Don't worry about it," George interjected. "A wedding is just a ceremony. You weren't invited, but what difference does it make? Your life hasn't changed. You still have your work and your life as always." Emily looked into her father's eyes, in the eyes of the father who once took pride in her and embraced her shoulders. She now could read nothing but indifference. "You're right," Emily said quietly. "My life indeed hasn't changed, but What has become clear is how you view me as family." Emily began walking toward the front door. Helen called after her, "Emily, don't be so sensitive. Sarah has always needed special attention. You've always been strong and independent. I'm surprised you're upset over something so small." Emily stopped and turned around. "Something small?" Her voice was calm, but anger swirled beneath it. "Is being excluded from family, having my existence denied, something small? You're overreacting." Helen waved her hand. "Anyway, the wedding was wonderful. It cost over $50,000, but it was worth every penny." Emily silently opened the door and stepped outside. The cool night air caressed her heated cheeks. Before getting into her car, she gazed at the warm light visible through the windows of the house, the place where her family belonged, where she was now completely an outsider. Back in her apartment, Emily stared at the Instagram photos again and began to cry uncontrollably. Her family's smiles, the lavish decorations, and the space where she didn't exist amidst the mingling sadness and anger. She steeled her resolve. "I am no longer a victim," she thought. The next morning, an unexpected knock sounded at her apartment. Opening the door, there stood Sarah with a designer bag over her shoulder and a smug smile. "Surprise!" Sarah announced cheerfully. "I came to see you. May I come in?" Sarah took off her shoes and stepped into Emily's apartment before being invited. She was wearing a glossy pink blouse with designer jeans, and a huge diamond ring glittered on her finger. Emily silently opened the door wider to let her sister in. Various emotions were swirling inside her, but she maintained a calm expression. "Would you like some coffee?" Emily asked flatly. "Of course, but decaf with oat milk if possible," Sarah answered as she sat on the sofa in the living room. "And no sugar, please. I'm on a post-honeymoon diet." While preparing coffee in the kitchen, Emily took several deep breaths. The humiliating conversation at her parents' house the night before was still etched in her mind. But now, with her sister appearing at her apartment, she thought she might have a chance to uncover the source of her discomfort. "It was a lovely party," Emily said in a casual tone as she handed over the coffee. Sarah smiled proudly. "Yes, it was perfect. Mom and Dad made it such a wonderful wedding." She pulled a glossy wedding album from her handbag. "Look, a professional photographer took these. Aren't they wonderful?" Emily silently looked through the photos, the solemn ceremony at the church, the lavish reception venue, her parents dancing with smiles, and the happy images of Sarah and Ryan appeared one after another. But her eyes were fixed on Ryan's expression. Something triggered her sense of unease. "It was the best day," Sarah proclaimed triumphantly. Then, with a malicious smile, she added, "Something you'll never have, big sister." Those words froze the air. Emily raised her eyes from the photos and stared at her sister. The shadow of the sister she had played with as a child was no longer there. "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. "I should feel happy for you, but right now, I don't feel anything." Sarah sighed. "Just as Mom said, you're jealous because I'm happily married and you're still single." "Jealous?" Emily gave a bitter smile. "I have no problem with your marriage itself. The problem is that I was excluded as family." "The invitation issue?" Sarah shrugged. "Mom told you, didn't she?" "It was just a change of plans." "That's a lie." Emily's voice was cold. "I saw the social media posts. The wedding must have been planned months in advance." Sarah was momentarily at a loss for words, but quickly changed her attitude. "Well, if that's the case, then yes, to be honest. Ryan and I decided not to invite you. It was a day when all attention should be on us. If you were there, wouldn't the atmosphere have changed?" Emily swallowed her words. Instead, she decided to approach from a different angle. "Tell me more about Ryan. Is his family from New York?" "Yes. Well," Sarah answered somewhat vaguely. "He does important work at an investment bank. He travels occasionally." Emily checked Ryan's face in the photo again. At that moment, a flash of insight struck her. She remembered him attending a museum event several years ago, but his name seemed different then. His work takes him away often? Emily asked. Yes, he's away on business trips 2 or 3 days a week. But that's the secret to success, Sarah said proudly. Last week, he was in New Jersey. Emily kept this information in mind. She had a friend, Daniel, who worked as a private investigator. He had helped her investigate the authenticity of artworks on occasion. Sarah stood up and put her bag over her shoulder. I've got to go now. I have a spa appointment, but I ordered copies of the album, and I'll give you one when they're ready as a memento of our wonderful day. She left with a smug smile. The moment the door closed, Emily's expression changed. She picked up her smartphone and contacted Daniel. The next day, Emily met with Daniel in her office at the museum. I'd like you to investigate an old friend, she explained. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. You normally ask me to investigate artworks. This is a personal matter, Emily said with a serious expression. I have an intuition that something is wrong. 3 days later, Daniel contacted her. Your instinct was right, he said. This Ryan Blake also uses the name Ryan Harris, and he doesn't work at Goldman Sachs. He's an independent investment advisor operating under multiple names. Emily suddenly felt her stomach sink. What else did you find out? He regularly visits a town called Montclair in New Jersey. I'm still investigating what's there. Emily thanked Daniel and asked him to continue his investigation. Over the weekend, she decided to go to Montclair herself. Montclair was a quiet suburban town with many trees. Following the address she had received from Daniel, Emily parked in front of a small colonial-style house. A tricycle and a child's bicycle were placed in front of the house. Emily's heart pounded rapidly. She waited in the car for a while, watching to see what would happen. Around 2:00 p.m., the door opened, and a small boy and a young woman emerged. The woman was beautiful, with her golden hair tied up. She held the boy's hand and started walking toward the park. Emily instinctively decided to follow them. At the park, the woman directed the child toward the playground equipment and sat down on a bench. Emily approached slowly and sat on the adjacent bench. What a lovely child, Emily smiled as she spoke. Thank you, the woman answered brightly. Ethan is turning 8 soon. The conversation continued naturally, and Emily learned that her name was Jessica. After some small talk, Emily made a decision. Actually, I have something to ask you about your husband, she said slowly. About Ryan Harris. Jessica's smile froze. Who are you? Her voice was suddenly filled with weariness. My name is Emily Carter, Emily answered quietly. Last week, my sister married a man named Ryan Blake, but I believe he might be the same person as your husband, Ryan Harris. Jessica turned pale and silently took out a smartphone from her bag. This man? She turned the screen toward Emily. There was indeed a photo of Ryan. Yes, that's him. Emily's voice trembled. Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. We got married 10 years ago. He always said he had a lot of business trips, her voice choked. They spent a long time talking on the park bench. Jessica showed Emily their marriage certificate, the child's birth certificate, and family photos. The evidence was clear. Ryan had been living a double life. He always said he spent half the week at his New York office, Jessica said tearfully. Sometimes he said he had overseas trips as well. They exchanged contact information and promised to share information in the future. Emily received a copy of a family photo from Jessica. It was a picture from Ethan's birthday party, showing Ryan embracing his wife and child. This photo was taken just last month, Jessica said. He didn't tell us about his marriage to Sarah. He must have planned to continue his double life. During the drive back to New York, Emily's heart was filled with complex emotions, anger, sadness, and concern for her sister. She knew she had to tell Sarah and her parents the truth. But how should she do it? When she returned to her apartment, as expected, there was a message from Sarah. I'll visit tomorrow. The wedding album is ready. Emily took a deep breath. Tomorrow, all the truth would be revealed. She placed the photos she had received from Jessica on the table and prepared for the next day. The next afternoon, Sarah knocked on the door of Emily's apartment. dressed in glamorous sunglasses and a designer dress. "Delivery," she called cheerfully. Emily opened the door and silently invited her sister in. Her expression was filled with quiet determination. "Coffee or wine?" "Wine is fine today," Sarah answered brightly. "Married life is the best. Ryan is truly the perfect husband. Last night, he prepared a special dinner for me." While pouring wine into glasses, Emily was aware of the photos placed on the table. They were still in an envelope. "Here's our wedding album." Sarah took out a luxurious leather-bound album from her bag. "Mom ordered it specially. I had a copy made for you, too." Emily took the album and quietly turned the pages. Numerous skillfully composed moments of a happy wedding, and on the last page, there was a large photo of Ryan kissing Sarah. "Can you tell me a bit more about your husband?" Emily asked gently. "Ryan?" Sarah smiled proudly. "He graduated from Harvard Business School and is very successful in the financial industry. We're about to purchase a luxury condominium in Manhattan once his bonus comes in." "Does he travel often?" "Yes, he's really busy, but that's the mark of a successful man, isn't it?" Sarah said, brushing up her hair. "Sometimes I feel lonely, but that's marriage, right?" Emily quietly reached for the envelope on the table. "Sarah, there's something I want to show you." "What? A present for me?" Sarah said happily. Emily silently took a photo from the envelope and placed it on the table. It showed Ryan embracing another woman and a small boy smiling in front of a birthday cake. Sarah's expression changed completely. Her smile froze, and the color drained from her face. What is this?" Her voice was hoarse. "A photo taken last month," Emily answered quietly, "in Montclair, New Jersey." "It's photoshopped," Sarah said with a trembling voice. "A fake created by someone trying to frame Ryan." "No." Emily's voice was calm but firm. "This is real. This woman is Jessica Harris. She's the wife of Ryan Harris, whom she married 10 years ago, and this is Ethan, their son." Sarah shook her head violently. "Lies! You don't like my happiness. You're jealous." She took out her smartphone and dialed Ryan's number. "Ryan, come here right away. I'm at Emily's apartment. She's saying ridiculous things." From the other end of the phone, Ryan's confused voice could be heard. Sarah hung up. "He'll be here soon. Then your lies will be exposed." Emily took out more documents from the envelope. "This is the marriage certificate of Jessica and Ryan Harris, and this is Ethan Harris's birth certificate. The father's name is Ryan Harris." Sarah took the documents and flipped through the pages with trembling hands. "These are forgeries," she cried. However, doubt was already seeping into her voice. "Your Ryan is actually named Ryan Harris, and he's living a double life," Emily continued quietly. "He has a son with Jessica, and he hid that from you." 20 minutes later, the apartment doorbell rang. When Emily opened it, Ryan was standing there. His usual confident expression was gone, replaced by an anxious face. "What's going on?" he asked as he entered the room. The moment he saw the photos and documents on the table, his face changed color. "Ryan Harris," Emily stared at him intently. "Or Ryan Blake. Which is your real name?" "Sarah, this is a misunderstanding." Ryan turned to his wife. "I can explain." "Explain?" Sarah's voice was trembling. "What is this photo? Who are this woman and child?" Ryan wiped his sweat and began making excuses. "That's my sister and her child. The photo is a bit old and..." "Lies." Emily took out her smartphone. "I met with Jessica yesterday. I have messages and recordings from her." Emily played the recording. Jessica's voice echoed in the room. "Ryan and I were married in 2015. He said he worked in New York half the week. Ethan was born in 2017, and Ryan is a wonderful father at least when he's home." The color drained from Ryan's face. "Sarah, I can explain." Sarah suddenly slapped his cheek with all her might. "A double life for 10 years? You even have a child." Tears of anger filled her eyes. "What was our marriage a lie?" "I truly love you," Ryan said desperately. "There was a time when my business failed and I was in debt. I was planning to end my relationship with Jessica, planning to end it. Sarah's voice became shrill. You were celebrating a birthday with her and your son just last month. In the midst of the confusion, Sarah called her parents. Helen and George were informed of the emergency and hurried to Emily's apartment. An hour later, the entire Carter family had gathered in Emily's apartment. Helen and George's faces showed confusion and anger. We spent over $50,000 in this wedding, Helen said in a trembling voice. And you are already married? Ryan tried to continue making excuses, but Emily presented more evidence. This is information gathered by an investigator named Daniel. Ryan, you were also involved in real estate investment fraud as Ryan Harris. The air in the room froze. George hit the chair violently. You deceived my daughter and used our money. Ryan suddenly changed his attitude. This is all Emily's fault, he said coldly. She was jealous that her sister would have a happy marriage. No, Sarah said quietly. Emily was trying to protect me. She turned to her sister. I did terrible things to you. I didn't invite you to the wedding. I accused you of being jealous, but you moved to reveal the truth. Helen and George looked at Emily with guilty expressions. We owe you an apology too, Helen said, her voice choked. Ryan headed toward the exit. Are you satisfied now? You've restored your family bonds, he said sarcastically. But remember, I don't give up easily. This matter isn't over. I'll report you to the police, Emily said calmly. About your fraud activities too. Ryan gave a sinister smile and left the room. After silence filled the room, Sarah began to cry quietly. Emily didn't hesitate to embrace her sister. We always took you for granted, Helen finally spoke. You were always strong and independent. But that's no reason to exclude you, George continued. We had lost you as family, and today you showed us what true family bonds are. Sarah looked at Emily tearfully. You investigated for me and found the truth, despite how terrible a sister I've been. Emily smiled. You're my sister. That's reason enough. That night, the family spent a long time talking about past wounds, misunderstandings, and hopes for the future. The cracks in the family were beginning to heal. In the worst of situations, they were trying to become one again. On a spring Sunday 6 months later, flowers were in full bloom in the backyard of her parents' Connecticut home. Emily sat on the terrace, gazing at the garden her father had cultivated with such care. Here's your tea. Helen appeared with a warm cup in hand. Her attitude had lost the arrogance of the past, replaced by gentleness. Thank you, Mom. Emily smiled as she accepted the cup. Helen sat next to her daughter and took a deep breath. I thought about many things over these 6 months, she said slowly, especially how unfair I was to you. Emily took her mother's hand. We all make mistakes. You've always met our expectations, Helen continued, and we took that for granted, using your strength as a reason to ignore your feelings. The terrace door opened and Sarah appeared. She was not in the flashy clothes of before, but in a simple blouse and jeans. A serene expression had returned to her face. We have an hour until counseling time, Sarah smiled at her sister. After Ryan's double life was exposed, Sarah had sunk into deep sadness. With the support of a therapist, she was beginning to show signs of recovery. The divorce proceedings were ongoing, with the final settlement still ahead, but she was trying to reclaim her life. I got an email from Jessica, Sarah said quietly. Ethan performed very well in his school presentation. Surprisingly, Sarah and Jessica had cultivated a gentle friendship through their common suffering. The two women had come to support each other as victims deceived by a fraudster. What happened with Ryan's trial? Emily asked. The verdict will be next month, George answered as he came out from the living room. For investment fraud and bigamy, he's likely to get a significant sentence. Ryan had been arrested and his double life had attracted considerable attention. The investigation revealed that he had defrauded multiple women of money. Is Thomas coming? Sarah smiled at her sister. Emily's cheeks reddened slightly. Yes, he's picking me up at 7. Thomas Reed was the museum's new fundraising director, and he and Emily had built an intimate relationship over the past few months. He was a gentle and intellectual man who deeply understood and respected Emily's work and passions. "He's really trying to make a good impression on us," Helen smiled. "The flowers he brought last week were wonderful." "He's a good man," Emily said quietly, "but I'm not in a hurry." "Your happiness is most important." George placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We won't impose expectations on you anymore." In the evening, the whole family gathered at the dining table. Thomas joined them, and gentle conversation continued. Emily looked around and felt deep satisfaction. Through tragic events, her family had regained true bonds. "Let's make a toast," George raised his wineglass. "To our family, and especially to Emily, because your courage and love saved us." The gentle sound of glasses touching resonated in the room. Emily exchanged glances with Sarah, and they shared an understanding smile. As sisters, they were feeling a true bond for the first time. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set on the horizon, announcing the promise of a new day, a new beginning.